which takes 3 to 6 months lead time. In some cases, the difficulty is probably 15 days to 3 months. And this again will vary from business to business. If you are in airlines, probably the scares can be just 3 days. So depending on what business you are in, these categories, the parameters might change. But by and large, it will help to understand how your lead time is. Another category, another way of analyzing is based on criticality. If you have done critical analysis or have done any kind of analysis around your assets, and then based on their criticality, you can actually manage your constrained asset differently. So if there is a direct impact on production or direct impact on environment or any other safety or any other compliance related things, such spare parts should be categorized differently. And you can actually use in cases of certain category of assets, you can run a report and you can see what in the past, what kind of spares were used on those assets in any kind of CM or emergency maintenance or corrective maintenance or even preventive maintenance, and then tag them according to the criticality of the asset, can be then tagged to the criticality of that spares itself. So which will allow you to identify such spares and have a different policy for their stocking, etc. Another options to do analysis is find out high value just based on unit cost, and we have seen certain companies use certain very, very high value spares, so you can actually categorize based on that, and then you may have a different storing policies on those, as well as different control because they are expensive on a per unit basis. So you need to track them, manage them a little bit differently, understand which all assets it was used, etc. Then there is, based on that earlier lead time, you can actually categorize it different things, and for each of one of these, you may have different parameters. The other popular thing in almost all of these softwares, there is always a min-max. Most of the time, it is set at the beginning when the item master is created. And then people may review it or may not review it, but it's a good idea to periodically do some calculation on the min-max. And this is a basic formula which can be used based on the usage of the spares. There are two ways companies have seen. One is based on just the store data, or it can be also used with the work order data, which has if you have the practice of entering all the spares which are associated with any work order, then you can actually calculate what the usage is. And based on that, one can determine the minimum and max. And then there are other policies or other analysis put together can help determine this particular levels. So most of the times it's an art and science. There is a judgment here, but the data analysis can actually assist you in determining some of these usual calculations. Then there are other factors that might be worthwhile to consider. What's the cost of storage? Whether it's Maximo, SAP, sometimes some cost factors are documented, but some are not documented. So you may have to find some other ways to get that data. Some ERP systems will also have these type of costs. And then there is a cost associated to ordering the spare parts or actually procuring the spare parts. So one of these things can also play a role in terms of determining what the stocking level should be for each of these spare parts. So when you all put together all these analysis, then it gets a little bit more complex in trying to assimilate all this information to make a decision. So before I go, I have a fourth polling question.
So which reporting tool do you currently use? It's Actuate, BERT, Crystal, Cognos, or others? So Sunil, we have the results. It's 32% are using BERT, 15 Crystal, and 38% are using some other tools.
Okay, good. So what it says is, some of the tools that you probably are using have certain limitations probably in terms of OLAP or type of analysis, ad hoc reporting, or statistical analysis. But we'll just touch some of those things as we go, that how some of the statistical technique might be of use to determine certain things. So let's look at certain business problems that can be solved with the help of data analysis. If you want to determine stockout risk or probability of stockout risk in terms for critical assets, there are some statistical tools like Weibull analysis can actually be used to determine failure pattern and expected failures, and then along with that use Poisson distribution method to determine the stockout risk. And I'll show you some of the examples in the later stage, but some of these things can be addressed with the help of the statistical techniques. Also, many a times there is a bottleneck in how we manage the entire spare parts process when a work order is created, and how people or we procure that or get that material from the stores. So all these processes can be analyzed using Six Sigma and see whether there are any marked variations and whether some of those things can be minimized, so you can predict the time required to actually get the particular spare. It could be related to procurement, or it could be just getting from a store itself. It could be from the facility within your, storeroom within your facility, or it could be across the plant, etc. So some companies have centralized stores, so they service a few geographic areas. So those things can be monitored. Understand procurement efficiency. This is also very important in terms of PR to receipt process steps, and understand whether procurement is not a bottleneck. And this is outside, like purchase and supply chain part of it. Optimizing some of these activities in some companies are outsourced to third party. So in that case, you can use these KPIs to actually monitor your partner's performance itself. If you have consignment or that type of arrangement with the supplier, maybe then this may not be an issue. But in cases where you have to procure and just-in-time situation, then it would be good to monitor this. Generally, optimizing stock holding, as discussed earlier, we can do the FSN and ABC analysis. Fast, slow moving along with the ABC analysis can actually help you determine your stocking, it will help you optimize your stock holding. We have also seen some companies have rush shipping charges, and you need to monitor them. In that case, actually the root cause of the rush shipping could be, in case of emergency work orders, it's legitimate, but it's more important to monitor for non-emergency work orders. And so it could be related to the planning and scheduling effectiveness. So you can have KPI associated with it, so that you address the root cause of rush shipping. Sometimes that can be a good cost, which can be contained. Some spares have erratic demand, so there are some statistical technique like Croston or ARIMA method to actually determine the demand for such spares. Some other examples, you want to identify which are slow-moving, non-moving, as discussed earlier. So you can have certain parameters. Any stock which is not moved in last 36 months, maybe you can tag them as non-moving, and in case it's 12 to 36, you can say slow-moving, etc. So The frequency of usage can be monitored, and then you can accordingly tag the asset or determine the movement of that asset itself. Also, there is you can determine spare parts cost for budgeting purposes. For annual budget, we all have to kind of arrive at that figure at the beginning of the year. So some forecasting techniques can help. Most of the time, people will use past record, but you can also look at based on your reliability goals, based on your other goals, how it impacts the spare parts availability itself, and then determine your level of spares or level of budget based on those factors as well. As discussed earlier on Poisson distribution, you can actually determine the based on your reliability goals, you can determine the stock level, and we'll show you some examples around that. Then there are some other things that can really help you understand demand patterns, etc. Most companies would like to have some sort of scorecard. This is a classic balanced scorecard philosophy, but accordingly, you may have different ways of looking at it. But this is a balanced scorecard approach as in one of the examples. There could be other examples, but here it is really focused on internal customers, the financial responsibility, the processes, and really building capabilities. So this is one example, and you can have your own strategy based on your own goals, etc. This is another way of presentation of goals. You might have, again, this is focused on a balanced scorecard type of, but another view itself. So you have a big goal and then all related goals around that. So it's kind of a tree structure. So at the bottom level, each one of them, all the stakeholders will have their own set of KPIs to deal with. Another example how you can actually structure, if you don't go the balanced scorecard route, you can actually create your own. Let's look at another look at some strategic goals and how some KPIs can be determined for those goals. If you want to procurement process, and again, we are not going to focus too much on procurement, but it's quite related. If that is the goal, then you may like to look at PR to PO process. Then how, if you're going outside to procure the items, if there is a tendering process or any other process, you can actually RFP process can be monitored. If you are also dealing with effective clearance of stocks, whether it's fast-moving, critical, etc., all of these can be actually monitored based on the compliance, and you can set some target for these KPIs. And some of these goals will change based on how you perform. And usually a good idea is measure what your current level is, and then maybe incrementally set the goals. So there's no point in changing from 50% to 80% or 100%. That will be a lot difficult. But maybe from 50 you can go to 60, etc. So like this, you can have a progression in setting the goals. So let's look at some actual examples. This is an example we just talked earlier about ABC analysis. This is as you can see it in the analysis itself. This is an actual report was created in BERT, and I think there is another version which also available on the Crystal. So this report actually allows you to tries to find out the main function here is cumulative distribution function. What it really says is, in this example, 33% of your inventory is really blocked in this particular item code itself. And this is fictitious data, but the idea is to understand you can actually, based on your this CDF value, which is a cumulative distribution factor, which nothing but if the total value of your inventory is $100, then what it is saying is 0.33% of that value is really is blocked into this particular item. So like this, once you do that, this will allow you to kind of tag A or B or category of asset. So in this case, it is kind of shown here that up to maybe the first 7 or 8 itself, it constitutes almost 75–76% of your inventory. So you can focus on those 10 items. Of course, if you have millions of items and if you have 10,000 items or 100,000 in your item master, then that number might be much higher. But invariably, you'll find that it would be in the 10 to 15% range of total assets. So this kind of allows you to tag, and then you can have a different policies for these A categorized items compared to the B and C. Let's look at this. Will also go hand in hand with fast and slow and non-moving classification as well. And this is again determined based on average time that is the inventory stored. Then it is actually looked at various how much time that particular item was stored in the in the storeroom, and then based on that, based on the categories, it is determined whether it's a non-moving or slow-moving, etc. And it kind of helps you understand how your inventory can be categorized. Similarly, another report which can go into this might be helpful from a purchase standpoint, how to determine economic order quantity based on, and there are set calculations. The formulas are available, but you can actually determine based on that ABC category or however you define them, you can actually determine the criteria here. This is an example which will show you what the economic order quantity is in a year, how many times you should order, and what that amount of order should be. So it will take into account various costs related to ordering, etc. Similarly, you might have erratic demand of certain items. Some of these analysis has to go hand in hand with other analysis like criticality, etc., and then and the value of the items, etc., the obsolescence policy, etc. And based on that, one has to determine how to use these techniques. But here it is Croston method. It's been around for a long time. It just uses means, and one can estimate what would be a demand for that particular item. So before actually there is analysis by which you can determine whether this item has an erratic demand or not, and based on that one can fit a particular curve. Let's look at another one. Based on usage alone, and if it's a kind of a uniform usage, then there are some other techniques by which, in this case, it's using ARMA model, but there are also other ARIMA, and there are other models which can be helpful to determine the forecast, the demand for the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever the your parameter might be. Another example.
We have a relevant question here, so
okay.
I'm sorry to stop you. Is SMD a popular item classification? SMD.
It is, but it has to work with your other analysis, the criticality analysis. If your reliability goals are very high, and even though it's slow moving, but you might store it with it. So it has to look into. One has to make. That's why it is art and science, because one has to look at the big picture and determine what the level of stock should be. But it is quite popular for non-critical items. And going back to this, how do you determine the criticality and how do you actually arrive? This is one simple example here. It's a distribution is used. It's to determine the stockout risk. Either on y-axis, it is really to what level of risk you want to take. And as you see, a horizontal line will tell you based on I want 0% risk, then you really want, probably in this example, about 30-32 is what will give you 0% risk. Again, based on statistical analysis. So based on what level of risk you want to take, you can actually determine the level of stock out. Now, this has to go with your other analysis as well, and this is determined based on past usage. Also, some of the analysis can be done based on the number of work orders that are in the system, especially for PMs, and past record can be seen for all the EM and emergency work orders as well as corrective work orders to determine what spares were used on the critical assets, and then one can use this tool in combination. So, there are different techniques need to be applied together, and that will help. Sometimes, simple analysis, if you don't want to do too much statistical analysis, then there are other techniques that can be used. One can look at your top 10 assets where you have used maximum spare parts. It will allow you to kind of focus on what is the issue with. This kind of goes with a little bit with the actual asset utilization as well as the way the operators are using that asset. Is there any issue with the spare parts procurement, quality of the spare parts? So there are many different things can be analyzed when you start finding exceptions. So one of the things we have seen is most of the executives would like to find exceptions, and it could be based on the count of usage, or it could be based on the cost alone. The number of shortages is another item that another measure that can be used to monitor, and especially for critical assets, and then determine you might have a different policies based on that, based on your past experience, the lead time. So there could be procurement might work to reduce the lead time, and then maybe accordingly you will have to adjust the level of the spare parts itself. Then there are some simple analysis related to usage. You can just get a list of all the this you might do it mainly for critical assets, all the spares that were used, and then determine the policies for each one of those things. Also, there could be suggested reorder point. Sometimes in Maximo or SAP or in some other tools, there will be reorder point, but some of these reorder point can also be calculated or need to be calculated or reviewed. So some of the things can help you determine what that reorder point should be, and then you can request the material accordingly. Let's look at the annual turn. This will also give you the usage of your inventory. This will also determine how effectively you are managing your inventory dollars or spare parts dollars. So if you are able to do a lot more turns, that's best use of your working capital, and this will help. This type of analysis will help understand whether you are able to get more turns. The more turns you get, and the formula is very simple. It's the total usage for the whole year and the average number of items that you carry. And the more it is that ratio, that means you are doing a good job of. So again, this has to look at it from your reliability goals as well. Then again, there are other simple reports like inventory value. You can do it by facility, you can do it by storeroom, you can do it by site. So there could be different ways of doing the valuation report, and you can actually do a graphical representation based on that. And then along with this, you can actually do the ABC analysis, so that you will be able to find if there are any patterns, etc. Let's look at some other, if this is just a basic transaction report, but there's another report which again goes with the other discussions, which is identifying all the slow moving, and then maybe you will monitor them for a few days and then decide how you want to handle those particular items. And then you can actually look at all the items, or it could be stock in a particular, sometimes one storeroom in a larger company. If there are multiple storerooms, one particular storeroom will have that stock and it is non-moving, but it may be moving in another store, so you may like to transfer internal transfers, or so stocking might be at the wrong place. So some of those policies. But at the larger level, you would like to see the items itself. Then obsolete inventory. Many places, some of these machines are in use for a long time. The inventory was bought at much early time and it has never been used. So it will be a good idea to determine that. Sometimes there is a direct implication of this from a reporting standpoint to the authorities on a GAAP standards, whether they have been depreciated or things like that. But it's nevertheless, it's a good idea to understand. And then overall, everybody would like to see the kind of a dashboard which gives you a bigger picture. And some of the calculations behind these type of dashboard, there could be different calculations that go with it. But as from a company standpoint, a presentation like this, where you might monitor 8 or 10 or based on certain criteria, you can actually see how well you are doing. And wherever you need control, then you can actually make sure that everybody is focused on solving those problems. So this is more from an analysis and control standpoint. But if I'm running a store, I need to know how I'm going to manage my storeroom itself. So let's look at some of the data analysis that can help to manage the store alone, storeroom. So this is how my store is actually, so this is showing number of items by facility, but it can be really for a particular storeroom also. You look at what the different valuations are, etc. Then you can actually, based on that, you can look at what is really stored in the storeroom, and this valuation will allow you to kind of get a sense of how much store material you have. Another example, for a particular storeroom also, you can run an obsolete item, so you can separate them inside the storeroom, and so that way it becomes a lot easier. So storeroom inside arrangement can also be managed with the help of some of these type of reports. Then if you are procuring any service, material, anything, any type of receipts, you would like to see how you have performed. Some of these things are available in most of the CMMS software or inventory management software, but some things might be useful based on your practices. This is again inventory versus inventory issues versus receipt. This kind of tells you the trend. Are you accumulating more, or it's kind of, ideally you would like to, if the goal is to reduce, then obviously you want this ratio to be kind of well within control. The moment you see that you're kind of getting more receipts than issues, then that leads that you are accumulating more material in your storeroom. So let's look at another report here. This will go with your the previous analysis that was graphical, but this is really a more detailed report associated with that. From a store itself, if one wants to see the store activity, you can find net issues by month. So this will also kind of see seasonalities. You can also see across the facilities if you do it, or across the plant or sites you do it. It kind of tells you how active the storerooms are. So this will help in monitoring all the activities related to issues across the company or across different storerooms. This is just to help understand the work volume. This is again most operational report, but it is showing all the issues by work order. So this typically you will do it for all the critical inventory. So you might more high or more expensive in your inventory, you might do this, or for critical assets. So this will allow you to look at all the things that were provided. Also, in many companies, there are spares which are kind of repairable spares. Some companies have policies that they will run to fail. Some companies might repair it, so you may tag your items accordingly, but you can actually monitor how you all are doing your repairable, how you're managing your repairable spares alone. Repairable, and you can actually create a list and kind of keep track of it. There are other things related to the pick list. Typically, that goes with the issues that will allow to have a proper documentation. This is again issues versus receipt, but giving you a little bit bigger, different view of it. It will allow you to look at the issues and the receipts and whether you are falling short. If you are practicing kitting, then actually some of these reports can be generated at the end of the day or beginning of the day, and which will allow some sort of lead time for the storeroom to prepare the kits, so they can actually build the kits well in advance. Then many times if some of the items are not used, then you would like to track what, from the kit, how many things were returned, and then have a report like that. So some software will allow you to do kitting very, very effectively. We have seen that as a good technique for managing the total handling time, etc. Let's look at some, if some companies are using consignment. So in that case, you would like to monitor all your liability associated with the consignment and how the consumption is. You may like to also monitor how much are you using from consignment and how much are you carrying yourself. This will have a direct impact on your working capital for spare parts itself. And you can monitor different KPIs related to consignment value alone, or it could be items, etc. And this can go with your availability report as well. So let's look at these spare parts stock inspection related activities. So here we are actually looking at how the stocks are inspected. So you might have a cycle count in which each unique item is randomly chosen, and so you can actually look at whether you are touching different in what month, how many items did you touch, etc. So unique items, so this will give you a sense of how much percentage and or number of items did you touch during your inspection process or stock inspection process. And you can have related KPIs that will go with it. And this is another example of it that can help you understand how many unique items you are inspecting in each cycle. This will help in actually determining the stock inspection cycle, what kind of items you should do it, things like that. Here it is variance based on what you find during the inspections and what is the actual, and the variance then you can have set some threshold, and based on that you can escalate the issue based on the value of the item, based on the discrepancy, the variance discrepancy, and then accordingly you can escalate. And of course you need to look at a storeroom level and all the in charge. So there are various parameters by which you need to analyze this information. Let's look at another one, cycle count. Again, this is more detailed report. There's another report might be of use is in the inspection you can actually find out which items were never physically counted, because this will help especially to find out any item which was expensive or has a higher unit cost, but it was never ever inspected. So that way if you are doing a random selection of items to inspect, you would like to include some of these items along with that random selection. And in some cases, you might have some items which will absolutely so you can create a list of items that absolutely have to be inspected. So depending on your policies, inspection policies, some of this analysis can actually help build the policies as well as execute on those policies. Let's look at adjustments. This is another area which requires, from an accounting point of view, as well as you need to find spillage, theft, or any other problems that you might have in the stores management, or it just people are not keeping up with or are not stored properly. So the adjustment, if the dollar amount will kind of help this type of KPI, will help monitor are we in range, out of range, and each company will have a different threshold for this type of KPIs. If you are doing any kind of manual adjustments within the Maximo SAP or any of the CMMS software, then you would like to see at the end of it, what's the dollar impact of all those adjustments that you made, and that way you can report into the ERP or any other authority or any other ways that need to be reported from a legal standpoint as well. Let's look at inspection. Just for handling inspection alone, one can actually, some of these reports can be useful. So I'm just going to rush through some of this. This is a ticket can be generated. I think most of the inspection tickets are generated automatically. This will help actually allow you to look at it. Based on that, let's come back to the last part of the presentation here. After this, we'll just look at how do you actually go about doing analysis. So there are different reporting strategies and different ways one can do it. There are tools that are available, whether it's Crystal, BERT, Actuate, or any other tool. Will give you a few things as discussed, but there need to be a kind of a strategy where one need to figure out whether we are using information to make the decisions, or it's just based on pure judgment, or whatever is in the system, that's all we follow, we don't review it, etc. But based on how your consumption pattern is, one can actually look at the technology, or the data models, or the sophistication of information, how that needs to be presented, and how actually end users are using that information. So what we have seen is it's a mixed. Some reports need to be IT supported or pre-built, standardized across the system, across the company, and then some could be supported or can be created by the end user. But generally, if the more simplified information, some of these data models, whether it's SAP, Maximo, or other, are very complex for average end users. So one needs to simplify the data model, complexity of the data model, and based on the user's maturity, one needs to design your reporting system. But generally, we have seen it's good practice to standardize and then ensure that the users are trained on this, and as much as possible, one should automate it. But while doing that, one should also look at what reports need to be retired, or you need to look at certain things that are not useful. So going forward, when you go to a new release or a new tool, this type of evaluation will be very helpful. I have another the polling question.
So if you're using Maximo, which version of Maximo are you currently using? Okay? Yeah, so it's 61% are actually on maximum 7, 28% on maximum 6, 11% on maximum 5, and no one is on maximum 4. Okay, let's move on. I think to build your own KPI framework, I think there are simple rules one can follow. Set and communicate clear targets. So if you have targets for your storeroom or for your inventory controller, then one should measure the gaps, improve, remove all the extraneous information, and figure out how you can actually realistically achieve those goals and build the KPIs around that. Usually about 5 to 6 good KPIs can be of great help, and people can focus on that. Once you achieve those goals, maybe you can retire and move to new set of KPIs. General roadmap for from wherever you are to reach to a different level of sophistication in data analysis. Understand where the business problems are and what your opportunities are, whether you're strategizing or whether you're building your inventory management strategy or understanding the problems. You try to put everything in perspective and then understand, prioritize them, look at the areas, take 1 or 2 areas and focus on solving those problems and evolve over time. And we have seen that strategy work in most companies. And based on your sophistication in data collection, the quality of the data, etc., some of these things will become a lot easier, and your preparedness as far as your IT technology or whatever tools that you decide to use, it will help in that regard. Once you do that, then set the KPIs, set all the related information which will allow the end users to manage their functions. Then do audit as discussed and make sure that type of analysis can be actually done. Once that is done, then ensure quality of the data, get all the data, related data available, ensure there is standardized in taxonomy, item master, some of those things are resolved. And then build these reports. Sometimes some of these reports can also help identify anomalies in your item master and things like that. It can work both ways. The data can allow you to identify bad data within the system, as well as good data will give you good information. So it kind of you just have to keep working at it. And overall build a culture of making data-driven decisions, and it will help in communicating, and you have to train your end users to use these reports, so that kind of builds the culture. And then once you do that for 1 or 2 areas, then maybe take up on other areas. So once we do it all, hopefully you can really move from reactive spares management, generally trying to solve problem, firefighting. You want to be more proactive, like in maintenance. Everybody wants to be more proactive in maintenance management, and spare parts is not any different. Once you reach a little bit of sophistication, one can use better techniques, statistical techniques to predict spares, and then manage it like that, forecast it, requirements, etc. And then eventually all this analysis together can help optimize your spares. So this is a journey, and it just takes a disciplined approach and in achieving overall optimization. So I think we are at the last 2 minutes. Rahul, any questions? A lot of them, lot of questions. We will try to answer as much as possible, and if we are not able to answer right now, we will send you an email with the answers. So in regards to job planning work, do you believe he should always provide an expected start date for all non-emergency new incoming work?
In many good companies, there is a target start date and there is a target end date for a particular work order for non-emergency. In many companies, it is set as part of when a work order is created or when it is approved, part of the process is to build that. So it is always a great idea, because then planner has sufficient lead time to plan for the spares. So it's always a great idea.
The next question is by Tony. How would you determine, how would you assign location of the parts for ease of storekeepers access?
That is one area that can be determined with the help of that fast FSN analysis, which can be done on that store or on that particular item, and then look at it from a proximity, which asset it was used, and and then kind of do another analysis, what similar assets are in which location, and based on that, so there are 2 or 3 different set of analysis need to be done. First, you will have to find the clusters of those assets, which location has more of those assets which require that type of spares, and you can do that by looking at the historic usage of those spares. So it's a combination of things. So there is not one single report that you just come up with, but I think if sufficient time is put on this particular issue, then you can actually analyze 2 or 3 things together and then arrive at a kind of a strategy, which item should be stored in which storeroom.
Yeah, thanks. The next question is, what is the best way to catalog and prepare items description? This will be used in item search and procurement.
There are, I know more from an analysis perspective, but there are a lot of third-party companies which provide that service. That may be something that can be purchased from outside, which will help cleanse all the item master and ensure that it is consistent across all the company.
Next question, it's a very long question. It's we are talking about FSN methodology to control spare stock issues, but for some emergency spares, that is critical spares for assets, maybe non-moving spares. Can I have an analysis where I have a view what is my non-moving inventory of spares, and what these are emergency spares or marked accordingly?
Sure. I think that's a great question, and this is where that combination of analysis is really, because there is not one single analysis that can solve all the problems. So this is exactly a great question, because one can do the FSN analysis, determine all the non-moving, and then tag, and then you do further filtering or further analysis on all those item codes which are associated with all the emergency work orders in, let's say, past 5 years, or also can be looked at for all the critical assets. So any critical assets, and you have disciplined enough in the CMMS system, if you have documented the related spares for each one of those critical assets, and if those non-moving items fall into one of those, you can actually color code and make sure they are skipped or they are coded differently in that type of analysis, so you know that they are non-moving but they are essential, they are critical, and that's the way you can further tag it inside the CMMS system also. So for next time, whenever you run a report like that, you can ensure that you filter them out. But you can actually create a report where you can see both a non-moving and then also look at the emergency work orders where it was used or it may be used, and all the critical assets. So this is where, if you have millions of items or hundreds of thousands of items, this type of analysis can actually help you determine the important spares.
Next question. According to Best Practices Conference last week, they are promoting critical spares should be determined by equipment criticality rather than part criticality. Which is better?
I think it will be equipment criticality, because ultimately all this is used for managing the critical equipment, and if the impact of downtime or extended downtime because of unavailability of spares, if that is large, then none of these questions, none of these things matter really, because the spare part cost could be so little compared to the impact of the extended downtime because of unavailability of spares. So one has to determine what the cost of downtime is, and the unavailability because of the spare parts, if one can determine, then that's where the decision can be made. So I think the answer is always to do with your larger business goals and how to determine the the cost associated with unavailability of a spare part. And once you determine that, all other things will become a lot easier to decide on.
We'll take the last question. We're already 6 minutes over the time. How should repairable spares be charged to work orders?
It all depends on the policies. If the company has a disciplined enough where a repaired and a repaired, let's say whether it's a rotating asset or a spare itself, if it is put back into the inventory, one can look at a replacement value. If it was bought fresh, bought new, and how much it would cost. And sometimes there will be a discounted factor. Some people may take 50% or maybe 70% of the cost as the replenishment value. But this is all internal cost basically, because there is no actual transaction, but these are notional cost. But it will help determine whether you should really focus on repairing them or not. But if you track them and over a period of time show that, okay, by repairing you saved X number of dollars and it took this much money to repair, and do that cost benefit analysis. So that's where it will help to make a decision on run to fail and this or repair in particular spares. But the basic underline is you've got to start with something. You may put 50% or 60% of the actual price, and maybe that's one of the ways to do it.
Hey, thank you, Sunil, for your answers. We have a lot more questions, and we will probably answer them through emails. And we are also having our next webinar on asset performance management on 21st of June. And please keep sending us your feedback. If you have any questions, any queries, we'll be happy to serve you. So thanks a lot, Sunil, for your time. This was an amazing session, and I'm sure, looking at the attendance, everybody found it pretty interesting. So thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot, and we will see you on.
Yeah. Thank you all. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.